Boon Carter had always been used to the idea that his return home was a moment of peace and certainty. Every time his horse climbed the familiar ridge that overlooked the valley, his heart would begin to race, not from fear, but from the natural joy of coming home. The path was as much a part of him as the scar on his hand. Every stone, every tree, even the way the wind shifted near the bend was known to him. He could always tell exactly where the sun would strike the wooden walls of his house, how the shadows would fall across the porch. But that day, something was different. The light itself seemed wrong, not in its color, not in the hour of the day, but in the way it bent across the house, the way it stretched unnaturally across faces that should not have been shrouded in shadows at noon. When Boon's eyes fixed on the sight before him, his breath stalled. His two wives, Ayana and Takala, were seated against the door of their own home, as if waiting for permission to enter. He had seen their faces countless times before, sometimes lit with joy, sometimes weary from work, but always with the certainty that this house was their refuge. Today, their faces bore something else entirely: fear. Not the fleeting kind, but deep, paralyzing fear that gripped him at once. Their eyes did not brighten at the sight of him. Instead, they looked at him as though his return was not salvation, but a greater danger. The door was barred shut with an iron lock. This was not how it was supposed to be. Normally, when he came back from his trading journeys, the door was wide open. His brothers, Wade and Sterling, were always waiting. It had become tradition. Wade on the porch, raising his hand and calling out, "Welcome home, brother." Sterling with a pot of coffee already brewing inside. It was as unshakable as the sunrise. Boon never doubted it. No matter what else happened, that greeting and that coffee would be waiting for him. But not today. Today, the porch was empty, and the door was sealed. Wade appeared behind the window, his expression cold, unfamiliar, almost hostile. Then Sterling emerged, but he wasn't holding coffee. He was carrying a rifle. The sight of it made Boone's chest tighten. Never in his life had he imagined that his own blood would raise a weapon in his direction. Wade's voice came from behind the glass. It carried none of the warmth Boone was used to, only a harsh formality. "Boone, we need to talk. But first," his gaze shifted toward the women at the door. "First, you need to understand what's changed." Boone felt the weight of his saddle pressing harder against his chest as he slid from his horse with careful, deliberate movements. His hand touched the leather bags strapped to the saddle. They were filled with the same things they always were: silver coins, cloth, coffee beans, nothing hidden, nothing dangerous. But in his brother's eyes, there was no trust. Ayana slowly rose to her feet, her movements graceful yet firm. She placed a hand on Takala's shoulder as though anchoring her. Her voice was soft but sharp enough to split the afternoon air. "They know about the papers, Boone. The ones you hid in the cellar." Boone's eyes widened. He had never hidden any papers in the cellar. In truth, he had never even stepped foot in it. His journeys brought only the simplest of goods, the most honest of trades. Yet Ayana's words rang with such certainty that for a fleeting moment he questioned his own memory. The air grew heavy. The house that had always been a sanctuary now felt foreign and dangerous. His wives were afraid, his brothers were suspicious, and he himself was caught in a confusion he could not unravel. No one knew what the next moment would bring. But deep in his chest, Boon Carter knew one thing. Whatever had begun here, it would not end easily. His brothers had always followed a ritual when Boone returned. No matter how long he had been gone, whether 3 days or 3 weeks, the moment he rode back into sight, the greeting was the same. Wade would step out onto the porch, lean casually against the post with a half-smile, and call, "Welcome home, brother." Sterling, younger but no less dutiful, would already be inside, pouring coffee into tin cups as though the aroma itself was part of the homecoming. That unbroken rhythm was the very heartbeat of their family. But now, the rhythm had snapped. Wade remained behind the glass of the window, his eyes steady and calculating. There was no warmth in them, no hint of recognition, only something that bordered on suspicion, or worse, judgment. Sterling appeared a moment later, but in his hands was no coffee pot, no humble gesture of comfort. He carried a rifle, and the steel of its barrel gleamed in the sunlight. Boone froze, his boots still planted in the dust at the foot of the porch. The weight of that sight sank into his stomach like a stone. A rifle meant more than mistrust. It meant danger. And danger in the hands of his own brother was a thought so alien, so unbearable that he almost refused to believe it was real. "Boone," Wade called, his voice clipped and formal as though reciting words rehearsed in advance. "We need to talk." He paused deliberately, letting the silence stretch, then added, "But first, you need to understand what's changed." The words fell like a gavel in a courtroom. Nothing would be the same after this. Ayanna shifted slightly beside the door, her posture rigid, her hand still resting on Takala's shoulder. Boone could feel their eyes on him. Two pairs of eyes filled with expectation, fear, and something he could not name. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, but his throat tightened with uncertainty. He had never been a man to doubt his place in the world, but in that moment he felt as though the ground beneath him might give way. Inside the house, the shadows flickered, as if stirred by some presence unseen. Wade moved again, leaning a hand on the frame of the window, his fingers tense. Sterling stepped onto the porch now, boots hitting the wood with deliberate weight. The rifle never lowered. Its muzzle, dark and hollow, pointed somewhere between the ground and Boone's chest, a line that needed only the faintest shift to become deadly. Boone swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "What's the meaning of this?" he asked, though even as the words left him, he knew no simple answer would come. Wade's gaze did not waver. "The meaning is simple. Things are not what you think they are, and neither are you." The air seemed to thicken. Boone felt his pulse hammer in his ears. He wanted to shout back, to deny whatever accusation was being built against him, but some part of him knew shouting would only widen the gulf already opening between them. Instead, he let the silence stretch, hoping his restraint might calm them. It did not. Sterling's voice cut through the tension, sharp as the rifle he carried. "Tell him, Wade. Tell him what we found." Wade's expression darkened. He turned slightly, just enough to cast a glance toward the two women still outside. "Not yet," he murmured. "First, I want to see his reaction." Ayanna's breath caught audibly, though whether from fear or anticipation, Boone could not tell. Takala lowered her eyes, but her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Boone felt heat rise in his chest. He stepped closer to the porch, slow and deliberate, lifting his saddlebags in one hand. With a practiced motion, he loosened the straps and tipped the contents onto the ground. Silver coins scattered like raindrops, flashing in the harsh sun. Bolts of fabric tumbled into the dust. A bag of coffee beans split at the seam, spilling its rich, dark aroma into the air. "Here," Boone said, his voice firm, though the frustration beneath it trembled. "This is what I brought back. The same as always. Nothing more. Nothing less." Ayanna rose slowly, her hand tightening on Takala's shoulder, as though steadying both herself and her sister-wife. The way she carried herself made the air tremble with tension. Her voice, when it came, was low but unshakably clear, slicing through the heavy silence like steel through silk. "They know about the papers, Boone, the ones you hid in the cellar." The words struck him harder than any bullet could have. For a moment, Boone simply stared at her, his lips parting but no sound escaping. His mind scrambled in disbelief. Papers, hidden in the cellar? The very thought was absurd. He had never once in his life set foot in that cellar. The old planks covering the entrance had remained untouched since the day he bought the ranch. If there were papers hidden there, they had been placed by someone else. But Ayanna's eyes, they burned with certainty, and that certainty made him falter. Boon forced himself to speak, his voice ragged. "Ayanna, I don't know what you've been told, but there are no papers. I've never hidden anything down there." Her gaze didn't soften. If anything, the faintest flicker of disappointment passed across her face, as though she had expected him to say exactly that. Behind him, Takala whispered, her voice carrying across the yard with the fragile weight of confession. "They said you sold our marriage certificates. They said you never meant to come back." The accusation made his chest clench. He staggered back a step, shaking his head violently. "That's a lie," he said, reaching into his shirt. His fingers closed around the small leather pouch that never left his side. With trembling hands, he pulled it free and held it up for all to see. "Here," he said, his voice cracking with both anger and desperation. "These are the only papers that matter to me." He opened the pouch and revealed the documents within, weathered but intact, folded carefully as though each crease was sacred. The tribal marriage certificates, signed and sealed, that bound him to Ayanna and Takala not only in love, but in law. Proof that he had stood by them when others doubted, that he had chosen them when the world outside called their union unacceptable. "These have never left my side," he said, his voice steadier now, fueled by the raw truth of his devotion. "I would sooner burn down this ranch than sell them." For the briefest heartbeat, he thought he saw something soften in Takala's expression. Her lips parted as though she might speak in his defense. But Ayanna's grip tightened, silencing her. From the porch, Wade's voice rang out, sharp and unyielding. "Show us the rest, brother. Show us what else you've hidden." Boon's hands shook with fury. He dropped the pouch back into his shirt, his chest heaving. "There is nothing else. You've seen my bags. You've seen my papers. What more do you want from me?" Sterling shifted the rifle slightly, the wooden stock pressing firmly against his shoulder. His tone was colder than Wade's, his words carrying a finality that chilled Boon to the bone. "We want the truth, and right now, you're not giving it." Boone's heart thundered. Every instinct screamed at him to step forward, to tear the rifle from his brother's hands, to shatter this nightmare with sheer force. But another part of him, the part that remembered long nights of laughter and years of shared blood, held him back. Violence against his own brothers was unthinkable, and yet the sight before him made it equally unthinkable to simply do nothing. Ayanna's eyes never left his face. The fear there was no longer just fear of his brothers. It was fear of him. Fear of what he might say, or perhaps of what he might reveal without even knowing it. Boone's stomach twisted. What did she know? What secret lay buried in the cellar that even he was unaware of? The thought struck him harder than any accusation. Perhaps there truly were papers hidden beneath his feet. Papers that bore his name, his handwriting even, though not placed there by his own hand. The cellar door had always been little more than a forgotten scar in the earth, two warped planks half swallowed by weeds at the edge of the corral. For years Boone had passed it without thought, dismissing it as useless storage too unstable to bother with. Now, under the hard stare of his brothers and the fearful distance of his wives, that cellar had become a yawning chasm between truth and betrayal. Sterling moved first, jerking his chin toward the shadowed outline of the trapdoor. "Open it," he commanded. The rifle in his hands was steady, a cold reminder that his patience had run dry. Boone's pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to protest, to shout that this was madness, that dragging him to some musty hole in the ground would prove nothing. But Ayanna's gaze pinned him where he stood, her silence sharp as a blade. The tremor in Takala's shoulders told him everything he needed to know. Unless he faced whatever lay beneath, they would never believe him again. With a stiff nod, Boon walked across the dry earth. Each step seemed heavier than the last, the dust curling around his boots like ghosts of the past. His hand trembled as he gripped the rusted iron ring embedded in the wood. The cellar door groaned as it lifted, the smell of damp soil and stale air rising up to meet them. Darkness gaped below, thick and suffocating, as if it had been waiting decades to swallow the light. "Go on," Wade said, his voice rough, almost eager. Boon lowered himself onto the ladder, the rungs creaking under his weight. The cool dampness enveloped him, and by the time his boots touched the earthen floor, the daylight above seemed impossibly far away. For a moment he stood frozen, his eyes straining against the gloom. The silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the muffled breathing of those waiting above. Slowly, his vision adjusted. Shelves lined the walls, sagging with jars clouded by mold and dust. Broken tools lay scattered across the floor, and there, at the far corner, half buried under a mildewed tarp, was a wooden chest. His stomach lurched. "Do you see it?" Sterling called down, his voice echoing off the dirt walls. Boon swallowed hard. He knelt by the chest, brushing aside the heavy cloth. His hands hesitated over the latch, every nerve in his body warning him against what he might find. Still, he forced the lid open. Inside lay bundles of yellowed paper bound by fraying twine. His breath caught. Letters, receipts, maps, all inked with a handwriting that looked unsettlingly like his own. He snatched one at random, his heart pounding as he scanned the words. It was a land deed, selling the very ranch he stood on. His name was scrawled across the bottom in a signature nearly indistinguishable from his real one. "No." The word slipped from his lips, barely audible. "This isn't me. I never signed this." He tore through the other papers, desperation clawing at him. Marriage annulments, promissory notes, letters addressed to government offices, all declaring his intent to sever ties with Ayana and Takala. Each page carried the same cruel forgery of his signature. Above, Ayana's voice trembled as she called down. "What is it, Boon?" His throat tightened. If he told them, they would believe the papers over his word. If he hid them, they would say his silence proved his guilt. Either way, the noose was tightening. Boon pressed a hand against the wall of the cellar, fighting the dizzying wave of panic. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had gone to painstaking lengths to fabricate his betrayal, to bury the evidence where it would be discovered at the precise moment it could do the most damage. And worst of all, whoever had done it knew his family well enough to predict exactly how they would turn against him. The papers lay between them like coiled snakes, their venom already sinking into the fragile bonds that had once held the family together. The setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of crimson and gold. Boon felt as though the dying light mirrored his own unraveling life, each minute pulling him closer to a darkness he could not fight. Ayana clutched the forged deed in her hands, the parchment trembling as she struggled to hold it steady, her lips pressed into a thin line, her breath sharp and shallow. Beside her, Takala shifted from foot to foot, her wide eyes darting between her husband and the damning papers, her heart clearly caught in a vice of loyalty and doubt. Wade broke the silence first. His voice was gravel, hard and unrelenting. "You expect us to believe someone went through all this trouble? Dozens of forged contracts, letters, even annulments, and you knew nothing of it?" "Yes," Boon thundered, his voice cracked with desperation, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Someone is trying to ruin me." "To ruin us. And you're letting them win by believing this filth." Sterling shook his head slowly, his rifle still aimed with unnerving calm. "I've known you my whole life, brother. I've seen you talk your way out of more trouble than any man alive. But this, he tapped the stack of papers with his boot. This feels different. This feels real. The accusation tore through Boon. You think I could sell my land out from under you? You think I could throw Ayanna and Takala aside like they were nothing? His hand trembled as he pointed toward his wives. Look at them. Everything I've done for them. For this family. Why can't you see that? Ayanna's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. The silence that followed was unbearable. The night air had grown colder, settling into their bones. Crickets began their chorus in the grass, but their song only seemed to deepen the tension, a reminder that the world carried on, indifferent to the storm tearing through one man's life. Finally, Takala stepped forward. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, yet it cut through the heavy air with surprising clarity. If he says it is not him, then maybe we should believe him. I have never known Boon to lie. Ayanna turned sharply, her eyes flashing. Haven't you? Think, sister. How many times has he vanished without warning, leaving us to wonder if he'd ever come back? How many times has he returned with secrets he wouldn't share? The words stung worse than Sterling's rifle or Wade's growl. Boon's chest ached, his heart hammering against the cage of his ribs. He wanted to scream the truth, to rip open his soul and show them the raw, unvarnished devotion inside. But words felt useless now, cheap against the mountain of evidence stacked against him. Listen to me, he said hoarsely, taking a slow step forward. His hands were open, pleading. These papers are poison. They are not mine. They are the work of someone who knows us, someone who knows how to tear us apart. He paused, searching their faces. Do you really believe I would choose ink and money over blood and love? Sterling's rifle didn't waver, but his jaw clenched. Wade's expression was stone, unreadable. Ayanna's gaze softened for only the briefest moment before hardening again. You speak as if an enemy hides in the shadows, Wade finally said. If that's true, then name him. Who would hate you enough to craft all this? Boon's mouth opened, but no name came. His mind raced. Old rivals, land barons, even lawmen he'd crossed paths with. Any of them could have reason to destroy him. But none fit perfectly. None would go this far. I don't know, he admitted, his voice breaking. But I will find out. I swear it. The vow hung in the air, heavy but hollow. His brothers exchanged glances, silent messages passing between them in ways only siblings could understand. Boon could see it. Doubt had already rooted too deep. Ayanna finally lowered the paper in her hands, but her voice was cold as winter. Then until you do, how can we trust you? The question struck harder than a bullet. Boon's breath caught, and for the first time he truly felt the ground slipping away. His wives no longer looked at him as a protector, but as a stranger. His brothers no longer saw him as kin, but as a liability. The night deepened around them, stars pricking the sky like silent witnesses. The ranch that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a prison, every shadow hiding accusation, every silence echoing with judgment. Boon clenched his fists, forcing down the despair that threatened to consume him. If trust had been stolen from him, then he would have to take it back, not with words, but with proof. And to do that, he would need to uncover the hand behind the forgery, no matter how deep the trail ran. As he stared at the faces of his family, his wives torn by doubt, his brothers hardened by suspicion,